Aliens are here. They're not out there. They're here. We don't know anyone who can make this. We don't know how to get the bond between the bismuth and magnesium at this level. This is way beyond anything that we know how to do. And when he meant we, he means like we human beings. They don't have it on their TV show Unidentified, but he makes a statement that we've got crash retrieval UFO tech. The Pentagon admitted that the ATIP program did conduct UFO investigations. I consider myself quite lucky. I get to throw my life into a subject that is absolutely fascinating. Something that 25 years ago I thought I would traipse into for about 2 months. Really all it was, I was just curious. I think everyone starts out in a certain way. Some people start out with a dramatic sighting or an experience. Not me. I just started out with a little bit of curiosity. I thought I wanted to be a professor of history in a university. And I was studying a lot of politics, And I saw a book by the great UK author Timothy Good, Above Top Secret, the Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. I thought, Worldwide UFO Cover-Up? I want to see about that. And I was intrigued enough that I thought I'll study this for 2 months just to find out one question. Not were UFOs real? I wasn't there yet. I was way more conservative than that. I just wanted to know, was this part of our history in any way? Was it true that there were generals and top intelligence officials and the like who were curious about UFOs? And if they were, I just wanted to know, how come it wasn't in any university history book I'd ever read? Like, why would it not be? How is that not an interesting thing? So I thought, well, I'll figure this out in 2 months and I'll move on. And that was 25 years ago. That's what this subject does to you. It grabs you, doesn't let go. If you're brave, if you've got the curiosity, it will not let go, because every one question you ask, if you get a little bit of a half of an answer to it, it'll raise another 10 or 12 more questions. And then you just keep going and you go down that rabbit hole, or many rabbit holes. And the other thing that I've often thought of, I want to move this over a little bit here, is that, in like the Matrix, right? How awesome it is. You get to take a red pill and see the actual reality. I wish it were that easy in real life. It never works that way. You have to take red pills all the time. Like you get one question answered and there goes the illusion, and you see a little more clearly and you think, oh yeah, that's how the world is. And then 6 months later you realize, there's still more. And you just keep tearing through those veils. And for those of you who are younger and you think it ever stops, wrong, it doesn't stop. It keeps going. The veils are always there. But it is true, after enough time, you do start, I think, to see things a little more clearly if you're patient. It's funny now because I've been doing this so long and I'm so fanatically dedicated to this subject. I think about it all the time. I'm lucky, I have a good education in the field, and even so, I find myself frustrated by the things I don't know. It keeps going. So anyway, I want to talk not about ancient history or modern history for that matter, but really recent developments in the field of UFOs. In the last 2 years particularly, if you've been following this, and this field has almost turned upside down, inside out. What's been going on? Are we achieving a kind of disclosure? I have thoughts about that, and hopefully I will share them. I just read a really bad article the other day by the astronomer Seth Shostak. I just have to say this. And the reason I call it bad is that he mentioned me as someone who thinks that, oh yeah, the government's going to disclose UFOs. And for anyone who says that about me, that's proof that you haven't really read a single thing that I've ever said. Like I have never said the government's going to do this. And also, by the way, it's going to be great. Like I've never ever said that. I've never believed it. So for people who may have read that article and don't know any better, this lecture might be a little bit of a corrective. So I will talk about the new face of disclosure. About 9 years ago, I wrote a book in 2 editions called AD After Disclosure. Had a great co-author, Bryce Zabel. He was one of the creators of the TV show Dark Skies back in the 90s. I bet some of you remember it. Good show. Anyway, Bryce and I had a really good collaboration on this book, and it was really an exploration in the idea of how could there be an end to UFO secrecy. So we wrote this in 2010, and then we did an updated version about a year and a half later. And back then I had this idea, I think that it's still a valid idea, which is that disclosure is a paradox. I always said it was a paradox. I said it's impossible and it's also inevitable. It's both of those things. It's impossible, I always said, because the powers that be, the people who've got the power over this secret, there's no motivation, as I ever saw it, for them to give this secret up. It's too powerful, it's too transformative, it's too revolutionary. The idea that there are other beings of great advanced technology and maybe great intelligence, for all we know, who are interacting with us in this world. And the fact that that interaction has resulted in a classified, what I've often called a breakaway civilization, where there's highly advanced technology in the classified world that's probably making a lot of money for those people lucky enough to be in on it. There's no motivation for those people to give that up. And then, of course, the social implications, maybe revolutionary implications that would come about as a result of getting this secret out. Too much, no motivation. So that's why it would be impossible. And people will write to me all the time. They'll say, you really have got this totally wrong. You think there's going to be disclosure. It's impossible. And I'm like, I'd say that all the time. But there's another side of disclosure. It is inevitable. It's inevitable because, as I've always felt, the secret keepers are only one part of the equation, right? They're not the only force in this game. They're not the only force in this world. We're in a very, very radical period of transformation, technologically, socially, politically. You might even say biologically, if you look into the future of what we call transhumanism. We're transforming our civilization in radical ways. We may already have developed some advanced quantum computing, and if not, then we're going to really soon. And everything else that goes along with advanced artificial intelligence, manipulation of the human genome, CRISPR technology. I mean, my God, where are we going to be in 20 years, let alone 50 years in our civilization? So with that in mind, I think with those changes that are coming, secret keepers be damned, they can't keep this secret forever. The tidal wave is too powerful. So then I've asked myself, well, how will this incredible secret, this great discrepancy in our world, this UFO reality, how will that discrepancy end? And the way I've looked at the UFO reality is this incredibly powerful thing that exists around us in this world that has been denied to us for our entire lifetimes. Denied to us in the sense that it's very difficult for people to have an open conversation in society about this. If you've had a UFO encounter, I bet many of you have, there's a really good chance that you probably have only told a handful of people about it, or less. And you think about the implications of seeing or experiencing something so utterly profound, transformative, powerful, inexplicable, and you tell no one. We're all atomized in how we deal with this most profound experience of our lives, of our civilization. That's a bad thing. And so that has to change somehow. And we call that disclosure, I suppose. After I published After Disclosure, I started thinking a lot about different scenarios of how that disclosure would happen. In other words, after I wrote the book, I continued to evolve my own thinking of it. And I had different scenarios, I guess you could say. So I called one fascist disclosure. That was back in 2011, 2012, I think I was talking about that. And premature disclosure, which was really the method of the book. In other words, something accidental happens, forces the hand, and the whole house of cards comes down. And then I thought, well, there's a people-driven element to this. Maybe the people will force a disclosure. By the way, the fascist disclosure, I now call controlled disclosure, and that's probably what we're moving toward. I think that's probably the leading one. I'll get into that in a moment. The way that I look at our world, I look at our world in a lot of different ways, but one way that you might find interesting is that we're in a race, a big foot race between us, the people, and our hierarchy, our elites, the masters of our universe, the people who meet every year at the Bilderberg meetings, or Council on Foreign Relations, or the Trilateral Group, or Bohemian Grove, or these type. Maybe they just have Skype meetings nowadays. I don't know what they do, but there are people who are at the very top of our pyramid, and they do own pretty much everything that's worth owning. We all know it. And so what's happened is something unexpected happened starting in the 1980s, and that was the internet. And it was, the implications of the internet really were, I have to think, unexpected. In other words, the explosion of creativity, the explosion of initiative, the explosion of communication and exchange of information that happened with the internet during the 80s and 90s and in the early 2000s. We all lived through it, and we all realized, my God, how impossible to have predicted. If you were living in 1985, and I remember 1985, this could not have been predicted. And so what it did is it disrupted the way the world was back then, and it caused a kind of greater social awareness, new sharing of ideas and technologies, file sharing, indeed, and a lot of other things. And so that caused a bit of a problem. If you're at the top and you want to control all of that, that's a problem. So what we're now seeing in our world, of course, is a reaction against that. And we're seeing it in YouTube, we're seeing it in Google. I'll get into that in just a moment again, but we are definitely seeing a rolling back of a lot of those freedoms that we've developed. So the solution to those problems is you control the web. You turn the web back into television. You thought you escaped the, what was that show? Full House? What was that in the 1980s? Shows like of that type, or Who's the Boss in America, I think. Really ridiculously mindless entertainment. I think we're going to be moving back into something like that if we haven't already. In the problem of sharing new ideas, new technology, that has a solution too. You control file sharing through international law. You shut down things like the Pirate Bay, and you just make things like that illegal. Increasingly, particularly, one of my fantasies had always been in terms of sharing energy ideas. Wouldn't it be awesome to have a little device, because someone's going to invent this, you just know it's going to happen, a little device maybe this big that'll give you free energy for the rest of all time. Like, is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. There's people around the world working on these ideas right now. Someone will come up with it, it's going to happen, and then if they're really nice, they'll upload it to the next generation of the Pirate Bay, and you'll download it with your CAD software, and you'll have a next generation 3D printer, and you can say, up yours to your utility service and live off the grid. Well, that would be nice, except that won't be, yes, that's worth clapping over. And we all want to see that happen, but of course that would be a problem. So the solution is you control international law, you don't allow file sharing, and if there's any real energy breakthroughs that exist in the classified world, and there are, those will be fully blocked off to anyone in the world. So they'll internationalize all of these classified ideas and laws, and we're seeing this happen all over the place. So that's the solution. And increasingly, and this is another lecture for another time, but you hear about the robo-apocalypse. That's a real word. I'm not making that one up. That's not the Terminator coming to kill you. That's just the Terminator coming to take your job. We're in a position now where it's a really big worry. Economists, technology experts are very definitely worried about the loss of jobs for all of the industrial world in the next generation or so. Could be 50% of all current jobs going away, maybe more. Not just physical labor, but a lot of intellectual labor as well. So what are you going to do? What will you do when there's half the population? There's literally nothing for them to do. That's a restless population. That's going to be a problem. The only solution for that is you create a total 24/7 police surveillance state in which you're monitored, tagged, facial recognition, voice recognition for the rest of all time. And that's on the way. Fun times ahead. So this is the world we're moving into. It's and I often envisioned a kind of disclosure, a fascist disclosure that would take place within the context of that type of a world. I was talking about this 10 years ago, and it frightens me to see that is one prediction I wish it was not coming true, but I think it is coming true. Now you remember about a couple of years ago, this lady was on the Jimmy Kimmel show, that's Hillary Clinton, and it was a very interesting thing. Jimmy Kimmel interviewed Barack Obama, he interviewed Bill Clinton, and he interviewed Hillary Clinton. And he asked all of them at one point or another about UFOs. And, a lot of people were like, well, Jimmy Kimmel must really be into UFOs. Maybe, but maybe. I've talked to some LA producers and people who've had experience in that, and their attitude is, look, none of those things are ever by accident. These are very, particularly when the Clintons come in or Barack Obama comes in, this is very carefully scripted. There are no accidents. This is not just casual chat that you have with these people. So the whole conversation he had with her about UFOs was not just an off-the-cuff sort of, oh yeah, by the way, let me ask you about that. No, it was all thought out. And he asked her about this, and she, I'm sure many of you remember this, corrected his terminology. She said, no, Jimmy, it's not UFOs. We like to say UAP. And she actually almost kind of mispronounced unidentified aerial phenomena, but she got it out there. It was obviously an attempt to rebrand UFOs before a very large audience. Actually, the phrase UAP has been around for a while, since the early 1980s. I believe it was coined by a very, very excellent researcher, Dr. Richard Haynes. But be that as it may, it worked its way into a number of militaries, including the UK military. They've used it. So she rolls it out on the Jimmy Kimmel show back in 2016. Interesting. What does it mean? Does it mean anything? Well, I think it does mean something. I think what we're seeing is an insider track, as it were, to rebrand and repackage the UFO subject in a different way to make it a little bit more palatable to the world. So I want to reevaluate the idea of disclosure, something that I guess I've been doing for the past decade. And I want to talk about controlled disclosure. I think that this phenomenon, this cover-up, has an expiration date. It cannot last forever. Nothing, no secret lasts forever. So the question is, when will this one end? How will it end? How much will it end is another question to ask. So, kind of talked about this already, the problem of the internet, that it brought incredible freedom of inquiry, incredible freedom of expression. By the way, the UFO subject is it might be the first substantive topic that actually made it to the internet other than computer programming. We're talking 1980s. There was no graphical user interface. Some of you remember those old bulletin boards that were out there. And I believe a gentleman named, I think it was Jim Corbin, back in 1986. 1986 started a UFO. And it was a Jim Spicer. I think he might have been the one. Anyway, 1986. That was, I think, the first subject that made it to the news groups other than computer programming. So UFOs has been right there from the beginning of the world of the internet. And the UFO field has been transformed by the internet, just as much as the internet's been transformed by the UFO subject. It's really amazing. So where am I going to go with this? So, well, let me just move ahead. I want to keep going here. What we've seen in the 21st century is, we can call it a drip of disclosure. We've seen the great amount of information being shared on the web. That's one thing. We've seen a number of public attempts to achieve a disclosure event. The famous one by Stephen Greer in 2001 at the National Press Club, Washington, D.C. An incredible event, frankly. Over the years, my colleague Stephen Bassett organized a number of X conferences in Washington, D.C., and then that culminated in the citizen hearing on disclosure back in 2013. I was very proud to participate in that. And a number of other public events by folks like James Fox, Leslie Kean, Robert Hastings, a few others, where they would put together, and these are all on YouTube. So all through the first decade and a half of this century, we've seen this type of effort. And I have to honestly say to you, I participated in many of them and often wondered, is this really going to make any difference? I always felt that there would be a kind of cultural ripple effect. And I think that's true. On YouTube, a lot of these videos get lots of views, so they're transforming the culture little by little, but the political establishment hasn't really done much about it until recently. And then we're starting to see what I've just been talking about. We can call it the purge. Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter. It's really tough, I have to say. I've got a YouTube channel. Tracy and I do a show every week. I do a solo show every week. I have an interview show. And I get brought into the YouTube principal office on a regular basis because of dangerous things that I say to you that they need to protect you from. I'm not kidding. It's really frustrating because I never really know week to week, month to month, what's allowed for me to say and what's no longer allowed for me to say. The rules are constantly changing and they don't tell you. They don't tell creative content creators these things. And often when they demonetize or deplatform, they don't give good reasons or any reasons whatsoever. Clearly things are going on. The UFO subject hasn't gotten as much attention as politics have gotten in terms of censorship. But I'm going to tell you, this is a YouTube screen. This is a screenshot. I just did this 2 days ago on my phone. These are the first 4 pages of screenshots when I search UFO. You try this, all right? And by the way, well, let me do one thing at a time here. So you can see the top one is a game. It's a UFO game, and it only has 26,000 views, and it was the #1 result when I typed in UFO on YouTube. Why? Totally irrelevant. Then they give you, there's a Tic Tac UFO video or whatever that is from ABC News. It's got a lot of views, almost 800,000. What you see are all of these are from major corporations. So ABC, NBC, Sony Pictures, the UFO movie gets a lot of these. There's Gillian Anderson all throughout. CNN, CBS, BBC, and on and on. All of these are major corporate establishment-oriented news organizations, all of them. Nothing alternative. The Neil deGrasse Tyson, UFOs doesn't mean aliens. They put that one up. That's always one of the top ones. A year ago, got 700,000 views. That's good, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of UFO videos that get millions of views, but they don't get into the top results because they're not part of the establishment hierarchy. In other words, the only way that the establishment news organizations can win the search games is by cheating, and the algorithms are their form of cheating. And this one, I just did this a few months ago. I took this series of screenshots, I think in June, and you can see it's almost exactly the same. A lot of the same images are up there. A couple of differences. There's Nick Pope doing his basement office interview with the New York Post. That's kind of cool. I'm glad Nick got up there. But then you see all of these others, mainstream, all these establishment news. So obviously what we're seeing, and this has all happened within less than the last year, a transformation of the search engines. The algorithms are just crunching everything together to control what you see and encounter when you search for UFOs on YouTube. And it's really scandalous. It's wrong. And it's just another sign that a very heavy-handed form of control is being shown here. So let me go back to the drip of disclosure, as we might call it. Things really started changing quite measurably starting in 2017. And that's millionaire, billionaire. I don't know how much Robert Bigelow owns. He's a very wealthy man. That's him on your top right. And he did a fascinating appearance on the television show called 60 Minutes. And what was incredible about it is that this is a very, very well plugged in man, obviously. He knows everyone there is to know in the U.S. defense establishment, or just about. He's been deeply involved in the UFO subject for many decades. Robert Bigelow, back in the 1990s, formed the organization called NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science. He later created Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Systems, BASS, and has really gathered around him some of the most interesting, intelligent, knowledgeable people relating to the subject of UFOs. I'll be talking about them. But he does this interview on 60 Minutes, and to an incredulous interviewer, who says, "Aren't you afraid of what people will say about you?" He says, "No, I don't care. I don't care what people say. The aliens are here. They're not out there. They're here." It's an amazing, amazing, upfront, frank statement. Didn't get a lot of play, that much play in the media, a little bit, not that much, but he did it. Later in the year, of course, is the announcement of the organization To the Stars Academy, TTSA, fronted by the singer, rock singer, pop singer, Tom DeLonge. Someone that my daughter grew up listening to, Blink-182, and his song Aliens Exist, I think. But he was very serious about the subject, and as many of you have been following this, October 2017, they make their announcement. Behind him are the former spooks, former, current, who knows what they are, high-level intelligence, defense officials, One of them is a man that I do know personally. I'll just say that. That's Hal Puthoff, second from the end on your right. A very, very interesting, intelligent man of integrity, in my view. I've known Hal and talked with him for close to 20 years. The other gentlemen I do not know personally, but know a bit about them. We'll talk about them as we move on. But they announced, what's interesting about the TTSA announcement, there's a lot of ways to look at it. It's a business venture. They list themselves as an entertainment group. Does that mean anything? I don't know. I guess they're doing a TV show, so that's entertainment. Their science group, they talk about, wanting to bring classified technology to the public. I've been hearing this from different people for years and years, so this is the latest iteration of that. But what's really interesting to me is that you've got a very, very impressive group of individuals, and by any standard, these are impressive guys. And here they go in front of the world to talk about the reality of UFOs. They got a lot of things wrong right out of the gate, using a picture of a Mylar balloon to be used to describe a UFO. That was just a Bush League mistake, as we say in America. That was just a really bad blunder. But overall, I think that what they have done is very, very deftly bring out the subject of UFOs before the rest of the world in a way that has not been done, and almost as a direct result of their initiative. You get the New York Times and Politico magazine just 2 months later putting out articles on TTSA. Didn't really get a lot of attention in these, but their information is what got into the New York Times piece in particular. It's significant that the New York Times wrote about this the way they did. For 70 years, the New York Times didn't just write, every now and then they would write about UFOs, but they did it constantly in the most snarky, wrong-headed, dismissive, debunking manner. So this is a complete 180-degree change. And it is a significant thing to ask, like, what is going on here? Now, there's a lot, in fact, they did 2 articles that day. Not 1, 2 articles. This was really the lead article, I guess you could say. This is the article that talked about the existence of a Pentagon program fairly recently to study UFOs. Wow, kind of an interesting thing. I mean, it's really kind of a bombshell. We've been in this now for 2 years and we've known about it, but just remember how much of a shock it was that the United States government at that time, that there would be an admission that, oh yes, we actually have been studying these UFOs. All the public knew for years and years is that the government closed it back down in 1969 and never reopened the investigation. So all through the 70s, all through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, supposedly no UFO investigation. And now suddenly the New York Times is telling us, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, they did. They did, because then they closed it down. They tell you these things when they're supposedly in the past tense. As we have really been learning, these studies have not ended. Absolutely not. But they make this announcement. And then the other article, of course, that they had that day was about the details of the Tic Tac UFO encounter featuring, Navy Commander David Fravor and his FA-18 Super Hornet. So we get the beginnings of a kind of a public statement on this encounter. All of that had been known previously, by the way. Even back in the website Above Top Secret back in 2007, there was some talk about it. But it didn't really make it to the mainstream until the New York Times covered it. So it was a big, big dropping of a bomb, you could say, that occurred. When it happened, there were some UFO researchers who immediately said, that's a false flag. The New York Times piece is a false flag. And now I study false flags. It's an interest of mine. And false flag is simply an event in history where some terrible thing happens and it's blamed on another group that didn't do it intentionally. So, an intelligence agency or a military group will do something, like blow up buildings and kill people, and then blame it on, terrorists, or back in the Cold War, communists. And that happened a lot, happens today. We live in an era of them. So I've studied false flags, and I know a little bit about them. And there were people calling this a false flag, and I thought, okay, you're going a little too far here. Is there spin? Yes. Is there deception? That's the real question. So the real thing that I wanted to ask about this is, what are they saying and what are they leaving out, and is what they're leaving out more important than what they're saying? So I'm going to just keep coming back to that. Someone's alarm is off. You know better. So, why is there blank space there? Later in 2018, more of this information came out. This is George Knapp of KLAS in Las Vegas. George has been very, very involved in the UFOs subject since he interviewed Bob Lazar back in 1989. He publishes an analysis on these craft. This came out of Bigelow Aerospace's study. And by the way, one thing we learned in the New York Times piece, of course, is that Robert Bigelow of Bigelow Advanced Aerospace, the man who was interviewed on 60 Minutes, was the main contractor to the Pentagon program, which is known as ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So Bigelow Aerospace got the main contract, $22 million for 5 years. Not a whole lot of money, but there you go. And we're learning, by the way, that there was a lot more money than that going into this. Tom DeLonge just did a tweet a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, what if there's more than just the ATIP program? And what if it's still classified? And what if it involves hundreds of millions of dollars that are still classified? Yeah, what if? Very interesting stuff coming out. Anyway, back in the spring of 2018, George Knapp published an analysis on these unknown objects by Bigelow Aerospace. And it's really interesting. So they did a report. They're finding these advanced aerial vehicles are not something that belong to the U.S. or any nation. So advanced, it rendered U.S. capabilities ineffective. This is a document that, in fact, this is parts of it right here, but I'll just read it. So advanced, it rendered U.S. capabilities ineffective, showed velocities far greater than anything known to exist. It could turn itself invisible, both to radar and to the human eye. What can do that? That's pretty interesting indeed. Essentially, it was undetectable and unchallenged. They go on. The report including statements from 7 F-18 pilots as well as radar operators on the ships. Despite the seriousness of the encounter, the pilots faced ridicule after their encounters. The Navy's initial report was buried, not forwarded to command. It was decided that the AAV, the Advanced Aerial Vehicle, was not a threat. They're talking about the 2004 Tic Tac UFO encounter, and this is just part of the paper. So that was released in the spring of 2018. That was kind of a big deal that came out. It's more toothpaste out of the tube. And then comes this lecture, just a little over a year ago, June 18, 2018. Hal Puthoff of TTSA, and Hal Puthoff's done many, many things in his career, gives a lecture that I think is one of the most important lectures of the last, I don't know what that is. We need some security over there. They're having fun. He gives a very important lecture. And by the way, I just want to point out, if Linda Moulton Howe's in the audience here, this is a piece that Linda was the caretaker of for a long time, and she gave it to Hal and his lab for analysis, and so she deserves a lot of credit for this. This was a piece that actually was sent into Art Bell back in the 90s. Art gave it to Linda. It was allegedly from a crash retrieval from the 1940s, I believe. What's interesting is that we've known about it for sure since the 1990s, still a long time. And what Puthoff is talking about, and by the way, you can watch this lecture on Vimeo. When I told him that this was on Vimeo, he actually had no idea. He was shocked. It's like, what? He thought this was going for a very quiet group, but it's out there. You can pay $5 US and watch it on Vimeo. Highly recommend it. So he talks about this. In fact, Steve Mera was talking about this piece last night, if you were here for that. It's very, very, very fine gradations of bismuth and magnesium and other materials as well. But what's fascinating about it, as he described, he said we looked at this for years and years, and not only had no idea who made this or who could have made it, because we certainly can't. We don't know anyone who could make this. We don't know how to get the bond between the bismuth and magnesium at this level. This is way beyond anything that we know how to do. And when he meant we, he means like we human beings. But also, we didn't even know what this was for, like what purpose. And he goes on, and he says, well, what we've learned in the last couple of years only is that, he said, this makes an excellent wave guide, he says, for electromagnetic frequencies, high frequency terahertz range. So basically, light interacting on this material gives it an anti-graphitic effect, is what he's saying. And what's significant about it is he gets into a lot more detail than I'm going to give you here, but he's very clearly saying, this is only 1 year ago, this lecture, that this material, manufactured at the nano or possibly even angstrom level, which we don't know how to do the nano. As far as I can tell, we don't do manufacturing, nano engineering at that level yet. I tried looking up scientific papers of the tiniest level of nano engineering, and as far as I can see, we're looking at tens of nanometers, but not the nanometer scale and not the angstrom scale, which is 1/10 of a nanometer. So this is a very, very advanced piece of metamaterial. And really what a metamaterial is, it's a microscopic lattice type of a structure it's artificial, of course, and it can give material unusual properties of all different types, unusual strength or unusual conductivity and what have you. And so this is a metamaterial, but it's existed for a long enough time that we don't know how to explain this. So you've got a very high-level scientist. Hal Puthoff is very experienced. He's had security classifications for, I don't know, close to 50 years or more. And here he is talking about this quite openly. Another thing he said in this lecture of his is, he said, I can talk to you about certain things for the first time without going to jail. I asked him recently, said, so who gave you the green light? Like, wouldn't we like to know? And he didn't really give me a good answer yet. I'm going to try to keep pressing him. He did not give me a very clear answer at all. But it's obvious that seems to me what you've got is a faction within some element of the United States government, United States military, United States intelligence community. And I think he's part of this faction. I call them Bigelow's Club from time to time. I think that's what we're looking at. You know, back in the 1980s, some people called them the aviary. And I think they've morphed. They've lost some old members, gotten some new members. And my take on these people is that they're trying to work their way into the labyrinth. They're trying to get to the center. They want the answers. I think even as recently as a decade ago or more, they were not at the center. And I'm not sure they're at the center now, but I think they're getting closer to the center. And my feeling is that they've got allies who are enabling them to get good press, enabling them to say a few things that they could not have said before. So there you have it. And shortly, during that lecture of Puthoff's, by the way, he mentioned that he was a subcontractor to Robert Bigelow on the ATIP program. And he said, one thing I could do for Bigelow was to get a sense from scientists around the world of advanced technology that would be applicable to the UFO phenomenon. And he talked about this pretty openly in his lecture, and he just said, I sent out requests for papers, ended up with 38 papers from scientists around the world on some really advanced subjects. I'll mention them in a moment. He said, the only thing is I didn't tell him it was for a UFO program. I said, what I'd like you to do is envision your field, I think he said in the year 2040 or 2050, and what will the state of your science be? So he was asking for explicitly futuristic tech from them on, here's some of the subjects: positron aerospace propulsion, warp drive, space-time metric engineering. That was actually his paper. Space-time metric engineering. Think about that. Dark energy, extra dimensions, negative mass propulsion, traversable wormholes, stargates, programmable matter, invisibility, cloaking, and so on. These papers appear on a Defense Department server known as the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communications System, JWICS. He told me, Hal Puthoff told me, that these papers are considered the Bible on the JWICS server to this day. They are the most sought after papers on that entire server. Most of these papers, in theory, they're available if you write to the authors, but they're typically not out there. to read. It's funny, after he mentioned this, there was a Freedom of Information Act request to get the titles of these formally from the Defense Department. They came out in January of this year. And a lot of the world of science completely misunderstood and botched the handling of how to talk about these. So, for example, the American Federation of Scientists, spokesperson of that, leader is that a man named Stephen Aftergood, wrote an article about this, and he just said this is like a waste of taxpayer money. I would beg to differ. I don't think he really understood or paid close attention to what was going on here. These are really important papers. They are the most cutting-edge papers that we have at least available to us in the non-classified world on some of these technologies that exist. But it just shows you how far we are from getting the world of science to look at this subject in a serious way, or at least openly in a serious way. They are still a long, long, long way from understanding even remotely how important this subject is. And incidentally, just I don't really have this on my slides for this presentation, but there's a very interesting talk given by the scientist Jack Sarfati from December of 2018, and he's talking about the physics of the Tic Tac UFO. It's only a half-hour long interview, and if you're interested in this stuff, I would recommend go find it and listen to it. It's worth listening to several times. He's got some ideas, and he kind of piggybacks off of some of the things that Puthoff and Eric Davis also talk about in these matters. So, but what we're seeing is through 2019, the drip continues. Politico does another article on, some of you remember this, it wasn't that long ago, a couple of months ago, that the United States Navy was updating its guidelines on UAP, that is unknown aerial phenomena, UFOs, on how to report them. So the US Navy is admitting to the world that yes, we have these encounters with objects that aren't supposed to exist, but they do exist. They seem to exist. We don't know who they belong to. And we're updating our guidelines. It's this funny thing about the UFO community, like they're like, right now they're just ho-hum about this, or they're nitpicking every little thing that they see that's wrong in this. To me, I step back, I think 2 years ago, we would have been astonished at an article like this coming out. So it just shows, you could take a silver platter and hand people some of the most incredible information, and they just say, yep, sure, show me something really good. Show me the truth. There's a lot that's always left out. There's always agendas. Everyone's got an agenda. That's because we're human beings, not angels, so everyone's got an agenda. But the thing that I like to focus on, and I try to remind people, is study the context of anything, but don't do it at the expense of looking at the content. Content first, content always first, and then you understand the context. Because if you don't understand the content of what's being said, and all you're doing is analyzing what you think are the motivations of someone else in doing this. Like, they're all members of the CIA, or they're all ex-defense intelligence. That's fine, and you can say, well, I don't trust their motives, and that's fine too, but if you actually ignore what they're saying, then you're making a big mistake, because there's information coming out that's important, and this is important. And the fact that they say things in the article that are kind of laughably bad, like this is important. This is response. This is from the article of April. In response to a series of sightings of unknown, highly advanced aircraft. Okay, that's interesting. Sensitive military formations. There have been a number of reports of unauthorized and unidentified aircraft entering various military-controlled ranges. That's an important statement. And by the way, these are things that I wrote about in excruciating detail in my 2 volumes of UFOs in the national security state. So to me, this is like right up my alley. I've studied so many military encounters with UFOs over and over and over again. And so that's what they're talking about here, almost the exact same tone. And then this is where I'm going to take issue. Chris Mellon is quoted. So Christopher Mellon's one of the members of TTSA. He's one of the most prominent members of TTSA these days. And they quote him for the article. So Politico obviously is working very closely with TTSA. We all know that. And they quote Mellon, and he says, if we have a new formal means of reporting these objects, that would be a sea change. And this is what he says where I'm going to disagree. Right now, we have a situation in which UFOs and UAPs are treated as anomalies to be ignored rather than anomalies to be explored. We have systems that exclude that information and dump it. Well, that may be true, but I'll guarantee you there are also places that take this very seriously and that look into this. It's not like the US military is just completely ignoring, or the UK military for that matter, or any of these others. They don't ignore these sightings. They know. In fact, what we learned with the Tic Tac UFO encounter in 2004 wasn't simply that Commander Fravor, was vectored in to see this object. It looks like a big 40-foot long Tic Tac hovering at the water off the coast of California, and it comes up to meet him, and it circles around as he's circling to go down after it, and it zooms off at a speed of 10,000 miles per hour, more. Unbelievable speed. And he says, wow, I don't know what it was, but I'd like to fly it. But there's much more than that. We have the radar operator, Kevin Day, of the USS Princeton, who's talked about this now. And he said, yeah, I tracked it. It was at an altitude of 28,000 feet. It drops in 0.78 seconds to sea level. Well, that's over 20,000 miles per hour, folks. That's really mighty fast and on a dime. So whatever this is. And so what happened is, what we learned is that in the aftermath of that encounter, guys in black suits came aboard the ship and confiscated all the radar data, all the technical data, and it's gone. So don't tell me that they're not exploring this. Don't tell me they don't know what they're dealing with. Don't tell me that this is not being observed. It's obviously being observed. So the statement that, we ignore these anomalies, I don't think is true. But I do understand where they're coming from in this article. At least I think I do. Because what these folks are doing, and I'm not part of them at all. I'm not on their payroll. I'm not their buddy. I don't attend any of their meetings. I don't really communicate other than occasionally with Hal Puthoff. But what I think they're doing is they're navigating a little terrain here. They've definitely got enemies in the Pentagon who hate what they are doing, who do not want any kind of disclosure coming out. They're also dealing with a hostile media, or at least what has been a hostile media, definitely a hostile scientific community, hostile academia. So they're positioning themselves in a certain way. That's just pretty much obvious. And so they make these statements. We're ignoring this data. We need to pay attention to the data. Okay, I kind of get that. Let me move on. Oh yes, RT. Ooh, evil RT, be very afraid. I like bringing RT in every now and then because you're not supposed to like RT. And anytime anyone tells me not to do something, that makes me want to do it. And so I've got an RT article here for you. Good for you. Experience it. Question more. They have an article here about, this was actually out there in a number of places, but they just, nice little headline. The Pentagon admitted that the ATIP program did conduct UFO investigations. And I mean, this is old news in a way, but the Pentagon had not previously made that admission. That had come out through the New York Times, it had come out through Politico, but the Pentagon itself, through their spokesperson, Christopher Sherwood, actually did formally say, yeah, ATIP did pursue research and investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena. By the way, the original was unknown aerial phenomena. Now they're calling it unidentified aerial phenomena, whatever. And then comes another New York Times bombshell article, and this is a good article. May 26th of this year. Same three authors who did the original New York Times pieces from 2017, Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kean. A lot of you know who Leslie is. And they come out with the second of these, or the second time that they published an article on UFOs. This is about the eastern US coast, off the coast of Virginia. Battle group in 2014 and 2015, so pretty recently, experiencing UFOs on a nearly daily basis for about 9 months, from the summer of 2014 to the spring of 2015. Wow. And there's just a little bit of the article here. Almost daily. So if it's almost daily for that long a period of time, you're talking well over 200 encounters, I would think. That's a lot of UFOs. The description of what they have in there. Whoops. Okay. So they say the object was seen almost daily for 9 months during training maneuvers, hypersonic speeds, that's like 5,000 miles per hour or what would that be, 8,000 kilometers per hour. Instant acceleration, stopping, maneuvering. And they point out in the article, like, to do this, you need a tremendous amount of energy, but and we don't have that amount of energy to do any of that. But these objects didn't seem to be leaving heat signatures that you would expect to have all that, and generating all that energy. One of the most dramatic things that they talk about was a near collision. You have two FA-18 Super Hornets. These are amazing aircraft that the U.S. Navy has. They're doing maneuvers. They're, I think, about 100 feet apart from each other, 30 meters, and an object comes at them, between them. It's square, cubed, with a sphere of some sort in the center. And I saw an analysis recently that attempted to describe this as known satellite type technology. I don't, with respect, I don't think that that's a credible explanation for this, particularly in the context of these constant barrage of sightings that the U.S. Navy was having. So it was kind of an amazing thing. And that got the Navy pilots really kind of angry because, they were noticing these objects all the time. They're doing training maneuvers. You're not supposed to have anything out there. It's dangerous. And when an object comes that close to you, that's very, very dangerous indeed. So what we learned is that a lot of these were video recorded in one form or another, and very little of this has come to us, almost none of it. On the same day as the New York Times piece came out, a new YouTube channel released called The Nimitz Encounter, that's the name of the channel, released a 30-minute documentary about the Nimitz Encounter with some very nice visual graphic recreations, and you can see a little bit of it there. And these are two of the gentlemen who were featured on there. On the top is Kevin Day. I mentioned him a bit. He was the radar operator of the Princeton. And the gentleman on the bottom was the one who talked about how the confiscation of the data took place and the aftermath of this. So I would recommend go seeing that documentary. And all of this is very coordinated. So clearly you can see the fingerprints of TTSA behind all of this. And in the aftermath, Washington Post, they're even worse than the New York Times. Well, probably one of the worst publications in the United States is the Washington Post. They're terrible. And they've been even worse on UFOs than they are on everything else. Worse than the New York Times on UFOs, and that took some doing. I mean, the most snarky, bad articles in bad faith for years and years and years and years out of the Washington Post. They finally do an op-ed piece on UFOs saying UFOs exist and everyone needs to adjust to that fact. What? Washington Post? Honestly, am I living in an upside down world? I wondered what is happening here that the Washington Post is doing that. Now, I'm going to say this. When the New York Times and the Washington Post are telling you to believe something, you better be really careful about what they're saying. These are the people who gave us weapons of mass destruction back in 2003. Liars. These are the people who gave us a lot of other lies about the modern world that were clearly showing that they were in bed with the U.S. intelligence community and the U.S. military, and extremely dishonest about what they report. So does that mean everything they report is dishonest? Well, no, it doesn't mean that, I suppose. But it does make me wonder, what is happening at the Washington Post? This doesn't happen by accident. So someone was able to get the Washington Post to do this editorial. Now, how high up does this come from? That's the question. I don't know anyone who's got an answer to this. There are people who think that this is a high-level, ultra-high-level CIA op. I haven't seen no evidence for this whatsoever, but it is definitely true. The Washington Post has worked with CIA since day one. They've been very close to CIA, so it is a possibility. But I think it's just as likely that TTSA's people, some of them are very, very tight with media. I think they were able to make this happen. So how that happened, the details are something that we really need to continue to look into. At the same time, all of this is happening at once. It's like the rollout of the TV show Unidentified, which aired on May 31st. So all of this is within a week. The New York Times piece, the new YouTube channel, the Navy's reporting from late April. All of this is very, very close together. The TV show Unidentified, you've got Tom DeLonge, you've got Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, that's the Steve Justice of Lockheed Boeing there. Some of the leading people in that show talking in detail about these encounters. And I just want to point out, we've seen the first 6 episodes of that. There are folks who say it's really great, and there's folks who say it's really terrible. There's people who say, I don't trust their message, or it's fear-mongering. You got Lou Elizondo constantly talking about this threat. This is a threat. And it's true, like he really does hit that theme kind of hard. So the question is, what's going on here? I will say that me watching it, I didn't find myself afraid in any way. I thought, this is not a scary show. You want to fear-monger me, you're going to really have to work a lot harder. What I did notice is that they covered a lot of military-type UFO encounters that of the same type that I have covered in my own history of doing this subject. And I will say also that they presented a better version. They've given us a UFO encounter with the military that's probably a better documented encounter than anything else I can think of, and that is the 2004 Tic Tac UFO at this point. The number of witnesses they brought out, the amount of information, it's really quite a lot. So I'm totally supportive of that, as I am supportive of the information they brought out about the 2014, 2015 sightings. There's things that I can absolutely pick apart or criticize, but overall I consider them minor compared with the fact that they're putting this information out. Something is being rolled out, and the question is, where is this headed? Well, one thing that we can say is that this is an attempt to do some kind of disclosure with a rebranding of the UFO subject. One thing that you hear on the show all the time that's disingenuous, absolutely, is we don't know what these things are. Hear this all the time. We don't know what they are. Maybe they're Russian or Chinese, although we don't think so. They say this all the time. Maybe they are extraterrestrial, or maybe they're from some other civilization. Well, they're not. Now, I want to talk with Steve about this, because last night in his chat, if some of you were here, he argued that he believed that this was human tech. And I'd like to know, what is the human tech that can do this? Because I'm not aware of how this can be done. How we're able to do objects, inertia-free objects moving at 20,000+ miles per hour, stopping on a dime. I'm not sure. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'd like to understand how it's possible. What I think, and also keep in mind, these types of reports have existed since prior to the 1940s. We've got reports from the 40s talking about objects moving at the exact same speeds that the Tic Tac UFO has been tracked at doing, 9,000, 10,000 miles per hour. Back in the 40s. Heck, I've talked many times about an account I found in the National Archives of Canada, a sighting from 1936 by, I think, a very reliable witness who was doing aerial mapping for the Canadian government in the Northwest Territories, one of the most remote regions you can imagine. He mentioned where he was. I looked at it on a map. It is absolutely remote. And he said, I was doing a pre-flight check on my aircraft. I looked up, and there, he said, was the most perfect configuration of an airship one could imagine. The year was 1936. It was like a slightly elongated object, no reflection, no identifying markers at all. It was just there. Except in 1936, for that matter today, in that part of the Northwest Territories, there's not supposed to be anything there. But this thing was there. He looked up and he saw it. He said, I watched it rotate from north-south to east-west, and it instantly accelerated and was gone. I'd like to know what can do that in 1936. You tell me. So this is not a new thing. And it's not that we're not making highly advanced craft. I think we are. I definitely think we are. I just recently had a conversation that once again reinforced. This is someone with a lot of experience in the classified world who just said to me, look, all the actions in the private world, all the actions in the private world. He said, when you leave he's talking about the U.S. government, you leave the U.S. federal government. If you go into private industry, if you've had security clearances, you will get more and better security clearances, many more and often many higher level, deeper, better security clearances when you go into private industry. You can have access to things that you could never have access to in the federal government. I said, well, why? He said, well, because our private industry is where all the action is. Whether it's private industry making fast walkers out in space, that is UFOs, or private industry doing who knows what other kinds of crazy tech that they're working on. Federal government, the US federal government, he said, doesn't have the money, doesn't have the brain power to deal with this. It all goes to private industry. In fact, what I've understood for a long time and what he just hammered home with me again is that, at least in the United States, because we have, in the US, the situation is so bad in terms of government secrecy. It's bad here. I mean, it's just as bad. But the difference in the US is that it's so much more. It's so much bigger. There's so much more money going into what's called the black budget, special access programs. All of this is, I call it legal illegality. In other words, the US government essentially serves as the police force and security force for these private companies, so they can make a bucket load of money off of my tax dollars so that they can study this tech in private. And the US federal officers and US federal government really have no oversight, like zero oversight over these programs. They just serve to protect massive private industry. And then, of course, if you're a high-level general or admiral and you go off into private industry, you go work for them as a senior vice president, and then you're in the club. So anyway, back to where is this all headed? We're looking at, to a limited extent, a form of disclosure with UFOs being rebranded in various ways. Well, one form of the rebranding is, and you see this with the show Unidentified, you see this with everything TTSA is doing. They're siphoning the history out of the phenomenon. It's as if the whole 20th century never happened. It's as if, all the investigations of the past, all the sightings, all the encounters, all the military encounters didn't happen, and they're starting over with this, we don't know what it is. Well, I'm going to call BS on that, and you should too. But it's not that I don't understand where they're coming from. I look at what they're doing as a tactic. It's a political tactic. It's a way to try to get the attention of the scientific community, of an intensely hostile scientific community. I think that's what's happening. So what I would like to see from them is that this is simply baby steps, and that eventually, if we keep moving, we'll reintroduce that history. And if they don't do it, then the rest of us have to keep on it. I certainly will keep on it, and reminding everyone of the history of this phenomenon. But it's obviously being pushed, this disclosure narrative, by members of To the Stars Academy. That's very, very important. And the question that we really need to be asking is, who is authorizing this? Where is this coming from? I would like to know. I've been trying to find out. I don't have an answer. I don't know anyone who's got the answer. People who say that they have the answer, in my view, are just guessing. I don't know what the answer is. Some people say, well, the answer is that the CIA is pushing it, or some other deep state apparatus, in order to scare the heck out of people, to justify rapid, massively increased military spending on a new threat. And I'm like, I don't really find that very credible. In my country, they don't really seem to need much excuse to throw yet more billions of dollars into the defense industry. Now, I could see people, in other words, as a form of public control, I guess I would see it insofar as this. So let's pretend that all of us here are in on the secret. And we know that this secret has an expiration date. And we are seeing that, like, this is going to come out, like it or not. So we'll make the decision, all right, we're going to control the rollout of this information. We're going to control the spin for as long as possible. So I think it's going to be impossible to control it forever, but we'll control it for as long as possible. And, ramp up a little bit of concern, a little bit of threat. Yeah, get someone's attention. You got to do that. And sure, let's make some defense contract money as a result of this. I have no doubt that there's a hope that some of them would have to participate in that. I mean, it's a lot of money there, potentially. So there's that whole part of it. So I could see that. But in terms of controlling the public, well, I guess I'll say this. There's a lot of possibilities here. As I said earlier, we're moving into an era of real potential 24/7 totalitarian surveillance state fascism globally. You know, China's rolling out their social credit system by which they measure their citizens based on how obedient they are. And it affects every single aspect of your life. And by the way, if you get, they've got street cameras that do facial recognition on you. And I'm assuming voice recognition on your phone calls and all of that stuff. And so if you are guilty of wrongthink or even jaywalking for that matter, they'll know about it and you get dinged on your credit applications or your travel or work that you're allowed to get. Black Mirror did a great episode on this and many of you have seen it, I'm sure. And my prediction is we're maybe a decade behind China. I don't think it's that. We're already seeing a lot of this in the public, the Twitter mobs and the Facebook shaming and the kind of the social control over people. Already we're seeing this happen. So it's our own form of social credit. But I think it's going to become more and more formal. So in that kind of a world, where the population is increasingly being utterly, absolutely, totally controlled in every way, it could be that we're in danger of seeing this subject being rolled out in a completely sanitized way. But the mistake that those people are making who are doing the rollout, if they think that they can keep it that way, I strongly disagree. The UFO subject, it's a really hard one to tame. This is not an easy subject to tame. So I think what they're doing is, looks to me, they're making an effort to tame it. And the question will be how successful they will be. So yeah, they're trying to create a safe form of disclosure. And as I say here, UFOs cannot be tamed. I'm getting close to wrapping this up. Am I running over? Am I on time here? Looks like I'm on time. Okay. So the hard questions ahead, looks like I've jumped ahead and I've already asked these. So can this narrative be controlled forever? That's really the question. And maybe it can, through YouTube deplatforming, Facebook deplatforming. We're seeing that the UFO subject is indeed coming under a lot of control. So, but the other aspect of it is that are there never going to be other platforms? Is there never going to be alternate forms of expression? In a sense, the genie's out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube. And the real question is, these are questions I was asking a decade ago, and I'm just seeing new variations of them now. It's really us against the people who are trying to control our minds. And who's going to win this one? It could go either way. Some of the hard questions, though, that are not really being asked in the mainstream yet, a little bit, but we really need to get into is the corrupt nature of the cover-up. That is the illegality of hiding this information from the world for an entire human lifetime, which has been going on, and the deep nature of the classified world that has been managing this. And then, one thing that hasn't come up and will not go away is the question of alien abduction. There are people in that community who do not believe there are alien abductions in the way that we understand alien abduction to take place. It's a big argument, but it's also one that's not going to go away, and it could be a very, very difficult issue in the years ahead. And then the whole question of reverse engineering technologies. Now, one thing, I did a little talk here last night, and I made a comment on the Wilson leak controversy, and I'll talk a little bit about that here too, I guess. But when the show Unidentified was rolling out on May 31st, Lou Elizondo did a piece on Fox News in the US with Tucker Carlson, who of all the American commentators on TV actually asked the best UFO questions by far of anyone. And so Carlson had Elizondo on for about 5 minutes, and at the very end of it, he actually asked Luis Elizondo, does the United States government have in its possession any of these craft? He said aircraft, but he meant craft. And Elizondo said, well, I got to be careful. I've signed non-disclosure agreements and so forth. But in a word, Tucker, yes, he said. He said it. It's on national TV. So you get this so the TTSA people, in other words, they also are squeezing a little more toothpaste out of the tube. And once it's out, it's not going back in. So there's this admission. They don't have it on their TV show unidentified, but he makes a statement that we've got crash retrieval UFO tech. And by the way, Dr. Eric Davis, who's part of this whole group, he's connected to the Stars Academy, and he's very close associated with Hal Puthoff, and he knows Dr. Kit Green very well. And Eric Davis made a statement to a friend of mine who contacted him that night after Lou Elizondo's statement, and Davis said Elizondo's statement was 1,000% correct. Davis says this, and he said, I can't really say much more. He actually rewrote his statement to my friend, and instead of talking about crashed UFOs, it ended up as recovered, landed, and crashed UFOs. So he was very, very careful about that. So implying that, yeah, we've got it. And so now this whole theme of reverse engineering is indeed seeping out into the public. This is Admiral Thomas R. Wilson. This is him back in the 1990s. And I'm just going to talk about this very briefly. He's the subject of what I absolutely consider the most significant UFO document leak of the 21st century. And in short, what happened. And I was shown a couple of pages of these documents back in 2006. I wasn't allowed to photograph them. I wasn't allowed to keep them, but I did see them. I read them pretty carefully. It's actually 15 pages in total. Over the years, I have talked about this quite a bit. A few other people have. Former astronaut, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell talked about them. Dr. Stephen Greer's talked about them. Because what happened is in 1997, Stephen Greer, Edgar Mitchell, and a few other people met with this man, Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was Deputy Chief of Intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff back in those days. Very important position. He later became head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, another important position. Greer got a meeting with him to talk about black budget technology and the illegal nature of the U.S. cover-up that was going on, and all about UFOs. They get a meeting with Wilson and some of his colleagues, including Wilson's boss. Very interesting. You'd love to have been at that meeting. April 1997 is when it happened. And what I was made to understand back in 2006, and what is the truth, is that after that meeting ended, Wilson had a private conversation with one of Greer's associates, another Navy commander named Will Miller. They talked about UFOs, bodies, alien bodies, crash retrievals, MJ-12, the whole thing. And Wilson then went on a 2-month little journey within the Pentagon to find the program that was reverse engineering alien tech. And guess what? He found it. Buried. Very deeply buried. Special access program within a special access program within a special access program. He had been given all this advice on how to find it. He found it. And he's thinking, you know what? I should have regulatory authority over this program. Talks to the program manager. Talks to the program manager plus the security manager plus the corporate lawyer of the program. Yeah, they have their own lawyer. Of course they do. He says, I need to be supervising you. I need to be seeing what you're doing. They're like, we'll get back to you on that one. We'll discuss this among ourselves. They get back to him and they say, well, we can meet you face to face. How about that? And he flies out to see them. Long meeting. He finds out, oh yeah, they're reverse engineering technology. They can't figure it out, they tell him. Not made by human hands, not made by man. It's not ours. Not Russian, not Chinese. It's off the charts. The reason we know about this is because 5 years later, Wilson had a meeting with Dr. Eric Davis of NIDS, owned by Robert Bigelow. They meet in Wilson's car for about an hour, a little more than an hour, and Davis writes it all down. Maybe he recorded it, but he wrote it all down. And that's the transcript, as best as Davis could do it. Seems pretty accurate. Wilson, by the way, was so angry that he meets with these guys in person. They tell him, yes, we're trying to reverse engineer. Painfully slow progress. It's really hard work. Maybe that was true, maybe that wasn't true, I don't know. Or maybe it's so compartmented that they were telling the truth. And maybe there's another program that's made better progress. That's how it is. The private world. You know, when my first book came out almost 20 years ago, my first reviewer, the first famous person to talk about my book was astronaut Edgar Mitchell. I was really lucky to get him. And he liked the book a lot. He said, I got one criticism of what you're doing. He says, my impression of your approach to this is you seem to think that there's a central repository of where all the secrets are kept. And he says, that's not my opinion. I think the whole thing is fractured. You've got privacy over here, you got secrecy over there, secrecy over there. And I'm at the point where I agree with him. I think that's probably what we're dealing with. So the folks who are talking to Wilson, maybe they're being truthful, maybe they were not being truthful about how much progress they've made. But they told him, yes, we're doing ET tech, can't figure this stuff out, it's really hard. He says, well, I want in. They said, nope, you're not in. Well, what's your criteria? Well, we're not telling you the criteria. But our criteria is that you're not in. They did show him the list of the people who were in the program. He said it's all private industry. No public people, no one he recognized, maybe one or two officials, but they were peripheral. It's all that company. By the way, the betting money is that it's Lockheed Martin. But no one knows for sure. So the implication of that is, by the way, when Wilson retired from the DIA, he became a senior vice president with the organization. He's still with them. Everyone gets bought out. A company called ATK, an Advanced Weapon and Space Systems Company. So he goes in. Guarantee you that his clearances went way up after he left government service as well, just like happens so frequently. So what we're looking at is, by the way, how did that leak come out? There are some really foolish people out there to this day who say this is a hoax. These leaks are a hoax. Wrong, not a hoax. Edgar Mitchell died in January 2017. These are from his papers. Edgar Mitchell was in on all of these conversations going on. A lot of his papers got out, from my understanding, and I wasn't part of it, but they came out legally with permission, so there you go. Someone's got them. I don't know who that person is. I may never know who that person is. I'd like to know, but I don't know. I don't know how much has gotten out. I sincerely hope more will come out. I'm very gleeful when I see more of this stuff come out. But anyway, they came out from the papers of the late Edgar Mitchell, and there's no question about that. So the implications of this particular situation make the disclosure scenario really complicated, because let's think about this. So we have a faction, let's call them the TTSA or the Bigelow faction, and they seem to be pushing a disclosure narrative, which they definitely are doing it. They're rebranding UFOs to a certain extent, although private members of that group are dropping bombshell after bombshell. Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Hal Puthoff, they've made statements publicly over the last year that are quite... Tom DeLonge, with some of his recent tweets in July of 2019. Major statements, so more and more is coming out. So I don't know where they're going to stop with all of that, but it's true that they're pushing a disclosure narrative. And how far they're going to go or can go is a really good question. I don't know how far they can go, because ultimately, it seems to me, someone's going to run into legal problems where some of the core information could very well be not classified, but proprietary. I've been thinking this and saying this for years, and I think it's more and more crystal clear to me that we're in a situation where governments are really just window dressing, and the real power is in the private financial and corporate interests that stand behind every one of these governments, US, UK, and you name it, any others. That's where the power is, that's where the money is. And if the secrecy has gone beyond formal control of governments, including that of the United States, then we've got a real conundrum on our hands. How do we get this information out? Where is the information? It's just a whole new complexity to what I have always considered the greatest mystery of our time. I'm just wrapping it up here, and thank you for your patience, incidentally. The question is, how much can come out? One of the things that I did predict 10 years ago with after disclosure is a tipping point. So enough information comes out that it cannot be stopped. It causes a kind of avalanche. And I guess the question that I'm wondering these days is that avalanche going to happen? And how much can happen? And can it be controlled by the people who are dropping these little truth bombs here and there for their purpose? I don't know, but the interesting thing is that in this field right now, we have gone through 2 years of the most tumultuous, upside down, inside out changing of narratives that I could have ever imagined. And we're not done. I have a feeling there's a lot more that's going to come out. I'm in the middle of a number of very interesting little conversations and investigations, and I've got colleagues who are equally involved in some deep, deep stuff, and I know there's more that's going to come out this year. So keep your eyes and ears open. There's much, much more to come out. That's my website, and I want to thank you very much for your time.
If you enjoyed this, make sure to watch the next video on Awaken Zone. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, but you won't want to miss what's coming next.